conflict starts from a lack of understanding of other people's self-interest perspectives. And I think that's applicable just about everything in life. If you kind of start from that, like, I really need to understand that first. Before I draw conclusions, before I try and manipulate the situation, before I try and sell you, before I try and problem solve with my values, I need to understand yours.
Today, I'm thrilled to chat with Jack Ballinghoff, COO of Ourisman Automotive Group, where we discuss his principles for growing a 17-store dealer powerhouse. A big thank you to our sponsors for making today's episode possible: CDK Global, Impel, and Car Dealership Guide News. And now, let's get into the show. Jack Ballinghoff on the CDG podcast. Jack, welcome. Officially.
Oh, thank you. Great being here.
Great to have you on. How are you, Jack? How are you?
I'm great. It feels there's a little bit of a guilty feeling, like because I love being involved with our dealership organization and all the moving pieces, and I feel like this is almost sort of getting on here and getting a chance to talk with you and the listeners is kind of a guilty pleasure.
I know the feeling, that guilt where you're like, hey, I should be doing something productive. Although this is productive. Here, let me sell it to you. Ready for this? So after we record, you will say something profound. You'll say many profound things. And some GM that works at some dealership that is inspired by you will reach out to you. And he'll just say, hey, I'd like to get to know you. And you'll get to know each other and you'll end up working together at some point. So there you go. We're doing we'll get you the productivity that way.
Cross-pollination is something sometimes I need to do a little bit more investing in.
Yeah. Jack, tell us a little bit about yourself. For those that know, they're probably very excited for this podcast episode. For those that don't know, they're going to get very excited. So yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
It's something some of the people in our organization have said to me. They don't always know the backstory. And then when I share it with them, sort of trying to teach and coach and mentor, they're like, that was really fascinating that you've actually gone through that. So just real briefly, I was born in Detroit, Michigan. So car era on an auto workers, actually born in downtown Detroit, moved to an auto workers street. My grandfather was an original assembly line worker for Henry Ford, got stolen by Packard. And then we made our way back to southern New Jersey, where I grew up when I was younger, and grew up in the beaches down near Cape May. And so even though there was that auto business past, I wasn't tethered to it. I did love cars, but I wasn't really tethered to it. Never really thought I was heading back there.
Yeah. And today you are the chief operating officer of Ourisman. What do you see? Like how many franchises, how many rooftops?
Yeah, we have 18 different franchises and 23 different dealerships. So we cover 18 franchises, 23 dealerships on over 16 campuses throughout the Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Richmond area.
And what do you do? Like, what's your day like, right? What's your scope? What are you responsible for?
I'm sort of responsible for, really how I put it is responsible for organizing a company and sort of transitioning it from where you have a bunch of individual dealers into a collective where there's some sort of standardization and accountability for processes. And really what I'm trying to do is take data, take our performance, and then try and match that into sort of performance training with the dealerships, and then use the management team to sort of implement what they see and try and improve upon performance, education, mentoring, teaching, wherever we need to wherever we see ourselves needing to deploy.
You were starting to give me a great analogy right before this podcast, where I cut you off and said, "Wait, let's record that," because I loved it. Because I asked you, I said, "What's it like working with Chris?" Chris Ourisman is the CEO owner of the group, and so I'd love for you to repeat that. Like, what is it like working with Chris?
Chris is probably one of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with, and the analogy I always use, it wasn't just with you, is I remember the scene in Monsters, Inc. where there's all the doors flying by in the Scream Factory, and they're going by at such pace, and you don't know which child's in it or what the potential for the energy that could get released is. And you're just dizzy watching them all. Well, Chris sees through all the doors simultaneously, and he knows what's behind it. And he knows what the potential is. And it's fascinating. And that's really kind of I don't know if it's really teased out. That's really kind of a fascinating structure of our company. Our company is really two different groups, and I think you've had others on that. There's the Ourisman family, and it's broken into different branches, and we are really two distinct branches. One is our existing was the base that was here before I came on board, which are the family stores that Ourisman and the Ourisman family had prior to here. And then I came on in 2018 with a partnership between Chris Ourisman and that branch of the Ourisman organization and the Graham Holdings Company, which is the former Washington Post company. So we run both companies, and that's interesting. It's very interesting, very fascinating to see how to bring something we have a startup we're running, and then we have existing dealerships and their history, and try to merge them onto one similar path, and really create a culture of bringing those two together.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how you got into this industry and, your first leadership role in a dealership? I think you had a pretty, non-traditional background.
There's some things in my life, I think, that were always sort of, I forget all these different movies about selling, right? About selling. But I think one of the things I've always learned is if you can be a salesperson and you actually understand what that is, it's not necessarily a hype machine, but if you know what being a salesperson is, you'll always have a job, you'll always have a career. And I think that's comforting in some ways. And I remember as a child, I grew up on a beach town, a small island, actually, on southern tip of New Jersey, and had a lot of time and not a lot of people. And you'd always have those contests, right? And I really didn't have a lot of, my family didn't really have a lot of money. And I always wanted to win those contests. I was sort of driven by it. And I wanted to win every contest, whether it was hoagies or magazine subscriptions or popcorn or whatever it was, win the trinket, get the applause in the auditorium, whatever it was. But, doing that, I had to learn what worked. And in those cases, what I realized was it wasn't the value of the product. Like, it wasn't like people wanted the hoagies. What worked is the objection was, I really don't want that hoagie. What I really want to do is support the school. So you learn sort of where the objection really is, and you start to focus on that. So kind of had that in the back of my brain. And so a lot of people thought, that I had sort of these sales techniques, but what I did is I was able to evaluate what people were interested in and what motivated them. But sort of fast forward, I went to Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and I went to a high school that really didn't focus on social studies. And I don't know how many people are familiar with it. It's the same school Bill Clinton went to. A lot of diplomats have come out of there, world leaders. And it's specifically, if you were just to narrowly define it, you talk about foreign policy and world affairs and international dynamics. I ended up going down a branch at that school called Non-Western History and Diplomacy. And what it was to strip your view of the way the world works and the way dynamics work between people and cultures. And sort of be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes to understand it. And when I got there, there was a word, it was called Orientalism. And I realized that was a huge word. That word meant a lot to me because it was really used to understand when people study history, they study it from stereotypes, and then they draw their conclusions from those stereotypes. And if you start to think about it, and really in talking about sales or running organizations, being able to put yourself in the position of your associates, your customers, your factories, the government, all those things. If you're not able to, you'll always be working in opposition to them. You'll be an adversary. But rewind for a second. And then what I ended up doing was my specialty. I studied Middle Eastern foreign policy and Islamic studies. And it really started, I was in a class on Islam, just a base class. And like all the studious students, you take out your notebook and you start to take notes. And the teacher, and the professor, I'll give her a shout out here, Amira Sanbal. I think she's still teaching. And she was teaching, I'm going to tell you about Muhammad and the Quran. And we were all ready to take notes. She goes, oh no, I don't want to see a notebook for 5 days. And she told this beautiful tale of Muhammad and the Quran and the followers and how Sunnis and Shiites split and all the beliefs. And it was like, I live in a country that does not know this, does not understand this. And until they do, we're not really going very far. We're going to be, Americans are great people. We want to do right, but sometimes we don't understand how to do it. You start to think about, for those that are familiar with the book, The Ugly American, we just sometimes are what we believe in, people admire, but sometimes our deeds don't always match those beliefs. And so it was really an understanding that. I think that's, hope as we get into this, I hope that parallels well into the auto industry. But what I really took out of it, and not even thinking about the car business at this point, I was like, conflict starts from a lack of understanding of other people's self-interest perspectives. And I think that's applicable just about everything in life. If you kind of start from that, like, I really need to understand that first before I draw conclusions, before I try and manipulate the situation, before I try and sell you, before I try and problem solve with my values, I need to understand yours.
Car business is retail business. You're dealing with different people, every single day, hundreds, thousands of them. And right, everyone, like you said, everyone comes from different backgrounds. And so people that are, I call them like chameleons, right? If you're able to morph yourself to understand that person, those typically, from my experience, have been the best performers. People that are able to, really understand the needs of that human being. And whether it's, whatever function is at, in a business, in a dealership, but really reciprocate and meet their needs, ultimately make them happy, but understand their position. So I think that's super well stated.
It's interesting because there's a lot of I think when people get jaded in our business, they're like, the customers are against us. They want us to fail. They don't want us to make money. And it's not that way. What we ended up doing is we created habits and behaviors in them by not trying to understand what their interests were. And when they have leverage, they punish us. When we have leverage, we use it against them in ways maybe we shouldn't have historically in our industry. But I don't think people, cultures, they're not destructive or evil by definition, but there are things that can turn them, that can sort of warp the outcomes of what people end up doing. And then it becomes an escalation from there, whether we're talking about consumers that get mad at us or the world stage.
You seem like someone who is, if I could just say it bluntly, like, you seem like you're pretty damn smart. Did you ever think that you would end up in the car business? Not implying that, let me be very clear, not implying that our business has some, incredibly smart people, but we also have very low barriers to entry. And so naturally, when you have low barriers to entry, you also attract, some not smart people. Did you think that you'd end up in the car business?
I didn't know. And what I will tell you is, it might come up as a recurring theme. My dad was not college educated. He was sort of a street fighting kid from Camden, New Jersey. But what he said, the diploma is the important part. It's the process. He says, I'm not so focused on what you do after life. He says, I think you're going to, if you lead a curious life, you're going to find a path to go down that'll fit right for you. So I've always had that ingrained to me as a young child. Like, I'm not going to just dictate where this education is going to take me or what I learn. But what you have to do is take the nuggets and find out what's applicable and then, move that in. So I never really looked at it from, the two couldn't coexist. And I think it was, anything was on, when I graduated college, anything was on the possibilities. I didn't really even do a lot of like job fairs or training and recruiting. I knew what the possibilities would be, but I actually wanted to back up from college for a couple of months beforehand. And then I was going to pursue a path, and then a whole nother path hit me to take me to the car business.
This episode is brought to you by CDK Global. CDK Global has been empowering nearly 15,000 dealers with the tools and technology they need to build deeper relationships with customers. Their team is keenly aware of the state of dealership technology, and while many vendors promise seamless experiences between your CRM, DMS, digital retail, and fixed ops, most of these bolt-on solutions tend to break workflows and cause more harm than good. That is why CDK has launched a new dealership experience platform. This new integrated software consists of everything you need to operate a dealership efficiently while delivering an unparalleled experience to your customers. Basically, everything working together, not separate, one system to run your dealership as opposed to 10. CDK developed it with an outside-in approach, listening to dealers every step of the way. You can learn more about CDK's dealership experience platform by visiting cdkglobal.com/DXP or clicking the link in the show notes below. I want to fast forward to your time in the car business. Where did you find your niche in the business, right? What was your specialty growing up in the car business?
So at first it was selling cars, right? And it was understanding how process works within a sales and then being good within that process. So you have to get that type of experience. But really, my niche was, there was one day I was the new car manager at Bill Page Toyota in Falls Church, and I'd just been promoted and, was a credible TO manager. And one day the owner, and I don't know what the foresight was, he came in, there was the used car manager and there was a new car manager. And he said, I want you to switch chairs and you're going to be the used car manager. And, and there, everything about pricing cars and advertising, and then trying to figure out your own stock and then marketing within your own dealership. All those things really intrigued me. And it was different. What really got me sort of enthused and hooked on it was you really painted from your own canvas. There was no limitations on what size it could be. It was just finding the right car and marketing it to the right person. And so early on, I had that concept, without really a formal education in the business about, I'm here to be a lot bigger than the new car department, and which actually became a problem in some points in my career, because the OEMs would come in at different points and go, what's going on in your dealership? They'd go to owners and they'd say, you're a used car dealer. Your used car manager he's marketing to your new car salespeople and you're losing deals. So, I might be fast forwarding there, but I loved that it was an unlimited opportunity. No one was telling me what my paycheck could be or how big I could be or how to pigeonhole my creativity. It was, I know a lot of people aren't going to say being a used car manager is an artist, but you've done this too. You go to an auction and you go, I can make that work, and I see something different than everybody else sees in this opportunity. And I'm not myopic and I'm going to be an innovator. And I saw a lot of narrow thoughts. This is late 80s, early 90s. And I'm like, there's a lot of impact I can do here. But sometimes it was hard to get, even in my first job as a used car director. Everybody was really focused on transactional gross and not long-term value of customer, and not the benefits of volume, finding that right level. And, I'd go in, just saying this in general, I could go into a store that had been selling 30 used cars and they tell me they want to get to 50. And when I get them to 100, they'd go, and you're at 100 at $1,500 a car. I'd get an owner going, I don't care, but I know we were only doing 30. I don't care about the 100. I want to know why you're at $1,500 a car, not $2,000 a car. And if you were any good, you'd be at $2,000 a car. And I'd be like, can't you do math? Like a multiplication sign would really do both of us. The familiarity with a multiplication sign would be really good for you right now. I didn't say that, inner voice, obviously.
Well, I want to take it a step further. You've mentioned several things about your kind of operating style here, but you specifically said earlier that one thing about your group is just seeing around corners. And I want to know, what does that really mean? Like, how are you doing that? How does that play out in your dealership today? And what I'm really trying to get to is, like, how are you different in the market?
It's really looking at sort of convention and how it can hold you back. And then really trying to understand where data is going to fit in there, and then trying to communicate that and bring people on board in the processes that really are healthy at building that long-term value proposition in your dealership. And I think this is sort of a little bit of a personal journey for me, because I could come on here and tell you all these beliefs, and some of them will be very controversial, and some of them will be like, what do you mean? But I'm saying that within that is a logic that our teams need to embrace. And I need to be able to communicate that. The part that's holding me back a little bit is I want to communicate it myself. The organization's too big. So really at that point, I need to help transition some of these visionary beliefs Chris and I have about customer treatment, business operations,
What are
employee
they, Jack?
satisfaction.
Can you share specifics?
So I do believe that we're going to have, in an era, we're going to have to standardize beliefs, but maybe that's not fully the question. But let me just give you a quick example. Yeah, I don't believe a used car manager should be putting numbers on trade-ins anymore. It's an antiquated belief.
Say more.
So think about their interests and the way a used car manager works, right? They want to maximize front end transactional profitability, and they're influenced by so many things. They're influenced by the shop bill. Oh, last time I got this, I got a $3,800 bill, so I need to hit this one low. But as we know right now in used cars, acquisition's the most difficult part to building a used car department. So they're restricting the intake of the highest of the best possible cars within your dealership. So they're self-interest. And what they've done here is vAuto is an incredible tool. I'm a huge advocate of it. But now we got a generation of used car managers that manipulate it. They don't use the tool right. So and what they've now done is they use vAuto to tell us what profit they want, not what a car's worth. Whether you retail a car or not is a secondary decision. Let's find out what the car's worth. That's how Carvana and CarMax work. They're not retailing every car. They're saying to the consumer, your car is worth the same no matter whether I plan to put tires on it or not. And then from there, the wellspring goes, is this retail? Is this wholesale? But we have used car directors, and they're playing this game, and we don't have general managers with enough used car skill to watch this. Now, I don't have this fully transitioned. I'm talking about down the road. We're going to power our numbers from something different, from true data. And honestly, this is just Jack Ballinghoff speaking. What I want to do is I want to be the Wizard of Oz, standing behind the Matrix, telling everybody what the car's worth, when I don't believe the data is as good as I am, which is completely selfish and egotistical. But that's the way I work. So that's an example. It's something saying that is real. If I've got a store that's 40% trade to appraisal, I believe 60 to 70% is the norm. And I believe in higher quality
just
brands.
To clarify, you believe that 60 to 70% of trades you appraise should be traded in. Yes. And that difference is likely skewed by managers that are trying to, quote unquote, steal the trade potentially. Which is they have a good intention, right? They want to, generate more profit for the store, but that actually comes at the expense of getting deals done.
Yeah. You're losing customers. Also, you're losing credibility. And I remember I worked for an organization once that they just believed that you bumped the used car manager because they were holding back. And I remember looking at a leader that I respected and saying, and everybody, trusted me. They always knew Jack would put the right number on the car because they could feel good about it. But one of the things he said, I had to say to him once was, I don't really want to go down a road where you're telling me the best way to do my job is to tell you what a car's not worth because I'm playing some strategy game with your new car managers. Like, can we get past that? Because that's taking up time from getting these getting these deals over the curb. And luckily, I've had the privilege of working in mostly large volume dealers on the dealership level to really sort of hone some of these beliefs and thoughts. And I've seen a lot of examples of this in action over time.
So let me be devil's advocate here, right? Because Carvana, CarMax have been doing this for years. It's not novel. And so my question to you is, do you think that as an industry, we're trending towards, as an industry, not just your group, but as an industry, are we trending towards more of, standardized processes, systems, given just, how technology has leveled the playing field? Right? Or do you think that this is going to be more kind of dealership specific? Like, what does the future look like? And what's the outcome? Are we just going to compress margins because people are going to be, AI is going to be doing all this thinking behind the scenes. So like you said, the skills of the quote unquote used car manager or any manager are just not going to be as important anymore. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to compress margins, but maybe that's getting to the end of it. I think what also is happening is, dealership groups are having to consolidate. And so talent is really challenged, or finding the right talent is challenged. So we're going to have to go to more standardized processes. And I think the other thing too is I think individual localized dealerships or standalone dealerships or small groups, they're going to wrestle with this to the point where they're receding until they get more standardized processes. Because being able to rely on talent within the localized level alone, you're just not going to find that many brilliant people. And so you're going to have to create them, prop them up, and get them to be really use their individuality and personality within that system to be creative on the individual transaction level in sort of the personal face of it, and not the and not really be a negotiator. I really think, when I say this, our industry in used cars is just a part of this. Everything is going to have to be about eliminating the negotiation part of in every department that we have. And we really have to be figuring out how to creatively move towards that.
Why do you think that is? Because there's obviously phenomenal, operations out there that still are not one price, but, do record numbers. I mean, you just call up any dealership that's locally, or, look for the busiest dealership, whatever it may be. And there's still plenty out there. Why do you think that is, though?
Is negotiate, and I would almost put it back a question with a question: is negotiation a transparent process?
Mm-hmm. So you think that whether you like it or not, the transparency is, the end game here, right?
Transparency and trust. And I sit there and think about, and we're not there as an industry. And I think the best dealer groups, they'll say they're all there, but getting a large group on board. But we're getting pushed in that direction, and it's not wrong. And what it's done is, if you think about our industry, we get a lot of criticism, and part of it is that when we have leverage, we use it against the consumer, and when we don't have leverage, the consumer uses it against us. There's a middle ground that we're going to need to find, and really it's coming into dealership valuations too. Like, you can't sit there when you look at an acquisition, you can't sit there and go, well, this is based on that great used car manager or that general manager, and you're paying that value. So what's going to, when you're looking at it down the road, it's going to be running some sort of standardized process that runs a middle ground of profitability and a responsible business process. And really, transparency and partnership with the customer has got to be part of that.
This episode is also brought to you by Impel. A word of caution to dealers: open source GPTs are conversation tools, not business solutions. If you want to embrace results, not risk, choose AI that's designed for automotive retail. With Impel AI, you can drive real results throughout the entire customer journey. From website, chat, sales, and service, Impel AI is custom built to achieve your business objectives. It features a proprietary blend of large language models, automotive optimization layers, and seamless integration with your entire tech stack. The result? Exceptional customer experiences and increased customer lifetime value, and that means more revenue and greater profitability. Embrace results, not risk, with Impel AI. See what the future of AI looks like today. Visit impel.ai or click the link in the show notes below.
I'm curious. So you mentioned, standardization of, appraising and valuing vehicles across the group. What about, is there anything else that you would say you do? You just have any other, strong opinions that are maybe non-conventional for what a traditional dealership would think, or how they operate?
Well, I would say this. I would say they were non-traditional 10, 15, 20 years ago. They're probably becoming more mainstream now. And one of the things that I think is really hard, I don't want to be critical of used car managers, but I really do believe, I feel so lucky to have been a used car manager, because it's the central nervous system of the dealership, right? It's where entry-level customers often come. It's trade appraisals, enabling new car deals. It's your parts, it's your service absorption. It feeds all in there. So you really have to, and like I said, if you feed it up to the larger funnel here, is you're only going to get so many new cars. Sometimes there's production, sometimes there's recalls. So you really get into that space. But what I would say, probably the two areas that I'm, and I've believed maybe I think ahead of time, is sort of a hierarchy of acquisition. And acquisition is very different. And I think hopefully this will make sense to people, but I have a hard time getting my teams even to do this in practice. And you should always be focusing your acquisition efforts where the least amount of competition and smart people are. And so back up for a second. What does that mean? You run a dealership, and a used car manager goes, and the GM goes, we need to sell 90 cars. We got 60 cars in stock. We need 30, 40 more cars. So the used car manager gets on Manheim, doesn't go to the sale anymore. They get on simulcast. They call their rental car company, and they stand there. I don't know how many people out there are familiar with Mannheim, Pennsylvania. It's the place, the highest prices in the country, and everybody, and I did it, right? But I would also say this: if I came home with more than 10 cars, I was wrong. Like that was, unless it was snowing, I was wrong. But anyway, I digress. And so the used car manager at that point, they get there, and then those cars come in and they don't make any money and they age, and everybody's like, well, we can't grow. But really, the most energy should be spent trading cars, getting the right numbers, making sure the process to get a customer committed, landed on the next car. We should be buying cars off the street. I think one of the things, and I'm sure a lot of people out there will agree with this, is people don't necessarily want to sell to CarMax or Carvana. They just don't think we'll do it as honestly. This thing that's funny about me, and you've probably done this, I do this because I love staying in tune. I go on the Carvana sale at sometimes at 4:00 on Mannheim on OVE. And you're like, oh my God, how did they get a car that low for that low miles for that low price? And you're like, because they didn't want to come see us. They didn't think it was easy enough. But when you start to build those relationships and you have somebody in the dealership that's like, I can make this easy. I can get you a check and I can give you a good price. They kind of want to do it. They want the relationship. They want that human interaction and contact. We've just pushed them away for a long time. So anyway, going back to this hierarchy. So then it's trade-ins, lease returns, trade-ins, purchases off the street, then going to your OEM, your OEM lease grounding site. Oh, there's some work and some sifting you got to do through there, and some reconditioning. I bought a lot of cars that way, and yeah, you got to go through some scratch and dent New York and New Jersey lease returns. And if you do it, it's pretty high. It's better than somebody else doing it, fixing the bumper and sending it to Mannheim and paying $3,000 more because the car was ready for the $300 dent you didn't want to take, or the wheel you didn't want to fix. And then it goes down to a lot of new platforms where there's not as much competition, like ACV, and those platforms, they're emerging. And then if you are going to the auctions, then, I find that the prices at the ADESA sales are less. Yes, there's not as many targets, but you work that through your search and your search functions. And then you go down to your smaller Mannheim sales. I'm saying this as a used car director. There's the ones I love. I'm going to give a shout out to Mannheim, New York Metro Skyline, one of my favorite sales for finding a car under the money. Well, so just because it can't be convenient when the used car manager, but they can't be putting themselves in the shooting gallery and then recycle the same cycles of failure. First month we sell the cars that had the profit, and next month we take the wholesale losses of the write-downs. And people need to get off that cycle. And then rental car companies, I beat that rental car company and got those 10 Altimas. Yeah, but did you go to their website and see that you just actually paid $500 more than they were offering of the general public for? All those are probably radical, but I still see GMs go, told my guy to get cars, and he got on Mannheim, and look what happened, Jack. I lost all this money. And I'm like, yeah, but you canceled your KBB buying center. What were those leads like? You want to shoot yourself in the foot. And then I think the other thing is, I believe
you're like encapsulating a decade of ups and downs with GMs and running a dealership in a monologue, and I love it.
But I probably also would tell you, what I once did it. There was a few years ago. I had to really plot to do this, but I was myself and a gentleman named George O'Connor. We became the largest Toyota certified used dealer in the country. And nobody had ever knocked off Penske or Longo. And they interviewed me afterwards. And I said, I'll pick up a penny. And I know the interviewer was like, what does that mean? I go, some people only bend down if they pick up $1. Some will pick up a quarter. I pick up a penny. And what I really mean by, that is, it might look not enticing to somebody else, but to me, and I'm sitting there reconditioning, what used car managers, what their defaults are to wholesale things. And I heard you say it on another podcast is, 100,000 miles is not a barrier anymore. You're just deciding whether it's mechanically a good car that will serve somebody well. That's your choice. And then the other thing is, I sit there and think about, like, I had manager one time. I'm like, why are you wholesaling that 5-year-old Chevy Cruze with 37,000 miles. Oh, it's all dented up. Well, I walk around the building. It's got a dent on the door. And the used car manager goes, I got a $500 wholesale profit. I go, why don't you want to do it? Oh, it's too long getting these cars to the shop. I go, why did you mislead me about the extent of the damage? And I sit there and I think of I sit there and I think about I think about Animal House sometimes. I hope I say this right because it operates in my head. There's a part where Bluto's rallying everybody and he goes, what happened to the Delta Ino? Bluto, it's too hard to recondition a car. The shop wants too much. Bluto. And I'm like, this is not the Delta Ino. Let's go put a bumper on that thing. And the $500 wholesale profit the used car manager makes versus the $2,000 plus a processing fee, plus the shop, plus finance, plus the possibility of another trade. They're just not looking. Front end gross profit, wholesale profit is a tip of the iceberg. So when we say gross compression, okay, front end gross compression, but it's just a component of a larger iceberg that most people in our business were too myopic to see resided under the water for a long time. And now it's having to come up because there is gross compression and you have to put it in your calculus.
Tell us how you really feel, Jack. So Jack, where do we go? Where do we go from here? I mean, what is give us the broader themes that we're entering as an industry. Is this just, only the efficient survive to like a, maniacal extent? I also want to know, how are you doing this in your dealership? Because you operate so many rooftops, but kind of let's take it one by one, right? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. So where do we go from here? We have to go to, maybe I'll say this, and because maybe this will be helpful to some other people that can't follow along my brain. I worked in a large organization for a long time, Coons, and great organization, and A+ general managers all across the board. And if you were a B-, you stuck out like a sore thumb. And it was incredible how the Coons organization collected them over the years. We're not going, and they were people that were general. They were specialists and generalists at the same time. It could be legal, finance, used cars, new cars, sales, accounting. They knew it all.
Problem solvers. Problem
we're not going
solvers.
to find it. Yeah, we're not going to find a stable of those. So we're going to have to standardize it. And I know this sounds wonky, and I know sometimes it makes people scared of publicly held corporations. And I'd like to think our organization walks a middle ground here and I could even go into that about acquisitions because it's had me make things, think about some of my processes more deliberate in acquiring dealerships. But we're going to have to be able to standardize it because I still really much believe in the power of the individual, the power of the salesperson, power of a great manager and mentor and coach. But we're going to have to standardize it to create sort of bumpers and systems so that when people come in our organization or up through our organization, they know, we've thought out some processes and some beliefs that there is little less wiggle room. But we still want to foster that creativity, but we're going to more clearly define the lines so that nobody really tries to cross over them. And when I say that is at the big thing is I'm not talking about a bunker mentality, but we're going to have to really lower our risk profiles as dealers. And these come in our operations. So we talk about negotiations. I think coming out of the pandemic and the chip shortage, negotiations I think the way our industry and a lot of people have used negotiations has put our industry in risk and put us in the spotlight. So yes, we are going to have to go to more standardization. We're going to have to be and people are going to have to know clearly where the boundaries are, and they're going to have to be set by HR, legal, and HR operations and accounting, and some very definite policies that are that are sort of over, they're sort of guided North Star by good legal counsel. I don't know if that fully answers the question.
Well, where does the line get drawn, right, in your mind, between standardization and the power of the individual? So this is a big topic. I speak with founders of AI companies in our industry weekly. I speak with dealers that are looking to adopt some technology daily. The big thing is technology here replacing or enhancing? It seems to be that, the best, most successful operators thus far are focused on enhancing the best individuals. So the weakest individuals are still, self-selecting out or just not making the cut. But the best individuals are just becoming even better, whether it's a, simple AI responder. In any capacity you can use it. If you're creating an RO and you need it to, clean up your RO. I don't know. I mean, there's so many little things and big things you can use it for. But the point is, there's, the question is, where does the line get drawn between power individual and standardization?
That's interesting. I would think, so maybe I'll start by answering with what I see us as an industry needing to continue to value. And that's power of individuals to provide connectivity to other individuals and consumers and each other, really. You have to start internally building that. So when I say standardization, I don't really necessarily want to define the step selling system for an individual store yet. I want to define what elements it's supposed to have. But I want to leave if they want to do, I learned in a step selling system, if they want to do it in a different order, or they have a slight different belief or word track for it. Everybody has to to be successful, you have to find what the goal is and then find how to put it in your own words. That was really a key to me becoming a successful car salesperson. So I think the line is really more legal and compliance. And some of the boundaries have to be a lot more clearly drawn, especially because a lot of what we say were sales practices and negotiation are really compliance and transparency challenges that are going to have to be addressed by our industry, or we're going to be forced to address them. And I think we're going to see, we blame this on the government, but in a way we kind of brought it on ourselves.
You mentioned your time, as you came up in the industry, but of course now you're overseeing so many stores. Can you just share some specific strategies that you use to operate your stores?
I value efficiency and consistency. Let's say you have a salesperson that's selling 20 cars. Our industry for a long time has valued that person. Okay, they sell 20 cars. That's great. But if they had 153 opportunities that month, what did you miss? We don't always look at the negative. We celebrate the success. Things like PVR, hours per RO. I'm sort of looking at that. I've always kind of challenged that. And in our organization, I get to challenge it. I get to challenge it too, because we focus on averages. We don't look at the lost opportunities that feed into those averages.
Averages are very dangerous. Averages are very dangerous.
And we compensate based on that too, which is also gets to be very dangerous because it undermines the relationship with the customer. And so what I try and do is, I'll give you some example. My first general manager job was a BMW store, 12 salespeople. And I remembered the day I started, I'm like I was then. And at the end of my first sales meeting, I had a salesperson who was 68 years old. And he goes, I'm going to leave, Jack. I'm probably not going to make it with you. I said, why? He goes, I only sell 8 cars a month. I said, well, how many customers do you take? He goes, I'm slowing down. He says, I get mostly my own customers. I take 15 to 20 ups a month. I said, and you sell 8 cars? I said, 40%. I'm in, right? And he's like, what do you mean? I go, I'm fine with that. How many days a week do you want to work? Like that. And so because he wasn't wasting anything, maybe there's sort of a depression era mentality that I was, brought up with from my parents.
No, you remind me of my dad. Trust me, in a good way. Like my dad is the type that, and he ingrained it in us, but he would squeeze the last drop of toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube. And like, I can't now, this permeates into many other things in life, but like, I can't throw the toothpaste tube until it's like fully, just like,
I'm going to take that to another level. I've done hand exercises to help aid me in getting the last, as part, one of the side benefits of that is to be able to fold over the flaps to get there. And my father's story is an ear of corn on the cob. If there was one kernel, even the small brown one at the end, he's like, you didn't finish that. Like the.
Well, it doesn't make it any better that we came off the last 3 years of so much excess and abundance that, we know it instilled so many bad habits in industries and people. And, as they say, when the tide, comes out, you only find out who's really swimming naked. And so that was obviously, there's a lot of dealing with that. And there's still people dealing with that. But, getting back to an efficiency mentality, like you said, focusing on that. So one of our core values here, our car dealership guy, is we focus on the last basis point. And the reason I was inspired, and basis point, not 5%, but the last basis point, because, again, I'm quick connection here, but like this, we do media content, and think about it, like what differentiates you, right? It's pixels on a screen. When pixels on a screen is your differentiator, you better be damn good, right? Like you're competing. When you're pixels on a screen, you're competing with the world. You're not competing with just, a local city, a local market. And so I was inspired to do this because I knew how much attention to detail matters. Growing up in our business, right, 5% net margins, being a used car dealer, right, you learn attention to detail. Frankly, you can't survive if you don't, because you'll get eaten alive in recon. Good luck getting that car reconditioned when, if you're not focusing on being scrappy, resourceful. But then when we were creating our core values, I did a lot of research and I asked myself, like, what companies do I admire, their execution? And one of those companies is a modern company, but DoorDash. I said, how do they do this every day logistically, or Amazon? But specifically, I said DoorDash. And I remember looking through, doing a little research and seeing that one of their core values that their CEO instills in the teams, and this is extremely relevant to our industry, it's that averages are dangerous. And why are they dangerous? Because if 99% of 1,000 customers had a great experience, but 1% had a bad experience, that 1% is a big number, right? Those are real people that had a bad experience. And so averages are dangerous because it doesn't tell you the entire picture, and it's not actually, striving for excellence. And you just don't build, in my opinion, a great, a company or just business that way.
I'll give you a very small, granular example of that. Is I took over Tyson's Toyota, great store, and it was a little bit on hard times when I took it over. And they had the ASM pay plan was based on hours per RO. And I was asking, working with this, I would go to the advisors meetings, which was, alien concept. What are you doing here at 6:30 in the morning? And I'm like, there is nothing more important than my service department right now. You need to understand that. I'm like, how long can we get an oil change done? And they're like, oh, that takes hours, Jack. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, we just don't have enough technicians. Is it not enough technicians, or it lowers the hour per RO and you just don't want to take the customer? Like, you're working opposite. So what ends up happening is this ever diminishing closing loop of customers that are willing to pay high hours per RO. And that group gets smaller and smaller and defects faster and faster, unless you figure out how to reverse that. So getting out of our hours per RO, going to total gross and CSI and metric and retention metrics was really, you have to sort of align. You have to align your pay with what your mouth, what's coming out of your mouth too.
I think the way I would sum that up is we have to work with people that don't use the word can, they use the word how. Not can it be done, but the question is how can it be done, right? Like, everything can be solved, right? But like, how can you solve it, and at what expense does it come at? That's the way I view it. And I think that it seems to be like, that's the way you view it as well. You've taken this very like first principles thinking and tried to, permeate it through the dealership and getting the team to really think that way, right? How do we solve this as opposed to can we solve this?
One of the things that I think about, and I, for me, it's personal. And then I try and make sure the people in my organization feel this way too. Why do people have such negativity around doing business with a dealership, right? And, why do so many, when Tesla was doing great and direct to consumer, why do they want us gone? And you have to really look at yourself in that moment and say, as an industry and as individual dealers, I'll probably bring up a bad subject here, but, when we had leverage, and there's historically leverage has been one of two things: supply and demand, or information. Information went away years ago. Consumers got that. But now it's just what we came out of with supply and demand. And when it's to our advantage, we use it against the consumer. And I had this happen to me at a Porsche dealership once. I was working at a Porsche dealership. I was used car director over 4 brands. And the Porsche manager told the customer didn't want to pay whatever it was. And he's, used the expletive, get the F out of here. And I just looked over, and in that moment, I said, you're going to kick them when the elevator's going up. They're going to kick you harder when the elevator goes down. And that's what happens. And so I know this is probably, sort of controversial when I say this, but the government's, with the regulation and cars rules and those other things, their intentions are correct. Their execution's totally off base. Their knowledge base, their ability is all off. But fair deals for consumers, transparency, saving time, getting rid of bad players, all those things are admirable goals.
I think that there's two ways to look at it, right? There's the free market capitalist way, which is let's remove emotions for a second from the picture and just say, hey, there's an asset and there's, a commodity or whatever, but there's supply and demand, and that dictates the price. So today you have, lots of these assets that there's a lot more supply and consumers get markdowns, right? In other cases, you have less supply, you get a mark up. That's the free market capitalist way. The alternative way is, hey, we should not, a discount is one thing. We should not exceed the manufacturer's suggested retail price, right? Because the assumption is that in MSRP, there's already a baked in, level of profit that's assumed. And beyond that, it's just, unnecessary, greedy, whatever it may be. I'm not here to tell you which one is right or wrong. And some dealers did excessive markups. Some dealers did no markups, and it came at the expense of lots of potential profit and anything in between. I'm just here to say that, there's multiple ways to look at it. And I'm actually deploying your mental framework here of just saying, which way do we want to look at this?
You know what? No human being is perfect. And I'll be the first to admit I'm not perfect either. It was really hard with dealerships necessarily, and when you have investors and things, to keep the horse in the barn. I still have brands in our portfolio that are in demand exceeds supply. We've reverted to not going over MSRP because, as you've spoken as my consciousness here, I do realize I agree that you have to put the restraints in. My restraints were whatever we advertise, we're really going to sell it for. We're not going to make it a surprise for the customer. If it's optional, it's optional. And we're also not going to be the store that puts an outrageous markup. And when I say that, there are ways there, but we're also going to do it the right way. If we're going to do it, we're going to disclose it properly to the consumer before they come in. But I agree with you that there's got to be, as I say, getting negotiations out of it. The point of putting any market value wasn't to try and overly take advantage of the customer. It was to find a balance. But as you look at it, and probably the lesson going forward is, there's probably going to need to be something arbitrary, to rein that in when it does happen, so that we gain that more trust and transparency with the customer. So I agree with you. We just came out of a very interesting time.
Mm-hmm. Are you today at your stores? Are you one price at all of your stores? You're not, but are you one price? Okay, so you're one price at some of your stores.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And what's been the impact to your margins?
It depends on it always depends on availability. Some of it has, some of it the margins are steady, reliable, focused. Some of it, when you have a really large store, the margins, the margins will go down somewhat, especially as you gain a little bit of size. But bringing our smaller stores into that big thinking, because I don't think any store has to be small. Sometimes it chooses that way, and we need to evolve them past that.
This episode is brought to you by my very own Car Dealership Guy News. CDG News is here to help you stay updated on all things automotive. We're not your typical news crew. We're bringing you concise, unbiased car industry news in easy to digest formats. From the hottest headlines to podcast summaries, dealership best practices, and industry insights, we've got it all covered. And guess what? It's all free, no paywalls, just like we always promise. Hop over to cdg.news, that's cdg.news, and check us out. We're all ears for your feedback. Tell us what you need. Give us your honest thoughts. We're here to deliver real value. So don't wait. Head to cdg.news now or click the link in the show notes below.
I want to talk more about incentives and specifically bonuses. Like, how do you think about bonuses, structuring bonuses? I have a note here about, and I want to see, what's your general take on this topic?
Yeah, in theory, I see the value of bonuses. I don't think we've done it right as an industry. I'll just tell a quick story about Tyson's Toyota. I went in, it was the processes had been dropped. I did 2 days of observation, and I go in my first Saturday sales meeting, and I know, and that was a jungle, right? You 60 salespeople swinging from the chandeliers, and they thought they knew it all. And in that moment, the glory was a little bit behind the dealership. And I handed everybody this thing I'd written about how to bake a cake. And basically the recipe I wrote was as screwed up as it could be, right? Put the flour, put the eggs, put it in the oven for 15 minutes, frost it, then add the milk, put it back in the oven. Everybody's like, this is the worst cake ever. I go, this is how we're trying to sell cars. And nobody got it. I mean, the GSM got it. Nobody got it. And I knew they weren't going to get it. But everybody, Saturday morning, bonuses, right? Spot money. And so everybody's like, how much? Okay, now we're past baking a cake. How much for the spot money? And I go, we are going to have money today. And they said, okay, great. And everybody's I go, $25 for every person you get to sit in a chair today and get a manager to talk to them. And everybody's laughing. And they're like, what? Sit in a chair? I can do that. I thought I got 3 deals set up today. Why? If you get them in a chair, you do a test drive, they do a TO, you get the money. And so Monday morning, I come into my sales manager's meeting, and everybody's like, what marketing did you do different, Jack? The weekend before you were here, we sold 14. We sold 37. What did you advertise different? I said, I didn't. I got everybody to do the very first step of a process. So what I'm saying there is we don't pay for the output side of a process or what's a gimme. We challenge that a little bit. I do believe there are some what I don't necessarily, I'll go into a couple things. I believe that we should incentivize for quick starts because we have to regulate energy levels without being bullies. So getting people to focus on establishing a track early in the month is a big deal. I believe on focusing bonuses on critical units to move, whether the aging used cars, overage, damage, demos, I believe in that. I also believe incentivizing on trades just because we can get some bad habits out of there. I always ask this to general managers, how many customers do you have? How many salespeople do you have saying, we never really get any good values on our trades. Go take it to CarMax. Until you look at the data and incentivize them to change those word tracks, you're not really changing much of anything because you're not aligning people in that way. So, and then, so I those are really sort of and then one thing that I've always believed in is, and you just heard it from the story, is incentivizing building blocks. And so to me, the big one these days is appointment showing. So if in a digital age, how are we connecting with customers to get enough credibility and enough information to them and, have enough transparency where there's trust built that the appointment comes and shows up. And it's something we measure within our company too. But I'd love to see, when I think of incentives, just on the sale of the car or the big gross or the average, when it's actually encouraging unhealthy balance, habits. I think all those things are really antiquated and really need to get out of our, even, I would just kind of go extrapolating that a little further, even sales plans based on, pay plans based on gross. You're empowering too many people that really there's an inequality of ability to control that. And it needs to be controlled from a very centralized pricing and discipline standpoint.
Wow, Jack. Look, before we wrap up, what haven't I asked you?
I've heard a lot of people talk about acquisitions. I haven't heard them talk as much about onboarding. I don't know if that's a topic for now or later on,
When you say onboarding, do you mean like integrating a new dealership?
Yeah. And I think there's, the reason I said that is there was an article in Automotive News a few months ago about a day in the life of a closing. And it was really funny because they were like, in the article, the reporter said, I've been given unlimited access to the process. And then when you read the article, they were like, well, there's 3 hours they kicked us out of the room and they didn't want to see how they didn't want us to see how the sausage got made. And I was like, oh, that's interesting.
So it didn't really deliver.
But then nobody really talks about bringing new people into your organization and what that's like and how to do that. Because I think the people that are really interested in this, sometimes they're interested in growth. And so I've been on both sides of it, and I didn't know if that was really worth sharing.
What's your take on that? Right. Like I've spoken about, I have spoken about, I think it was, I forget who was someone on the podcast where we said, what are the top 3 things you look for? That first day you enter that dealership, right? I'm curious to know your take, right? How do you think about integration, and what are the top things you look for after making that acquisition?
Well, after, I would actually,
or before.
Yeah, the question sounds kind of backwards because a lot of that
let's go first principles. Let's do it.
Yeah. I almost think you look at like, when everybody gets lots of acquisition opportunities served to them, and then you have to sit there and say, well, how do you evaluate them and what do you value? And we have an executive team in our management company, and there's very different perspectives on that. There's Chris Ourisman, guy who sees behind the doors in Monsters Inc. And there's myself, who's, granular level up through all, levels of the organization and is half crazy. And then we have legal counsel, CFO, and then we have, our real estate and industry relations person. And we all make sure we get outside of our lane. But what we try and do is we try and look at what's come in the offering memorandum, and try and understand how people function within that. Try and figure out areas where they overperform, areas where they underperform, and then try and put that in your back pocket and say, okay, when I get a chance to start delving a little more deeply into this dealership, connect what I've just put in my memory bank with what I see when I get the opportunity to finally meet with people on the dealership level team, to try and understand why they've operated that way, why they've been successful, why some of the metrics data hasn't really worked out for that team. And then look at it and you sit there and go, from an acquisition standpoint, since you're in theory right now, still you're overpaying for acquisitions, you almost have to look at what can you improve, and where's that. And then you have to sit there and say, what are your core strengths? Where are we going to be better when we take it over? One, shocker, used cars, right? You just gave me the look like, which area is this going to be, Jack?
Well, I just had Kyle Coleman on the podcast, who, just acquired a couple stores, and asked him the same thing. I said, like, what's your specialty? Like, what is your genius? And for him, it was the F&I office, right? He's like, hey, give me the finance office. I will turn that thing upside down, right? For you, right? You're finding you're looking through all the nooks and crannies, and, the used car department, right? Recon, right? All those. So that is your specialty. But yes, go ahead.
No. And I think you have to look at, I don't know if we want to talk about, we're not going to necessarily talk about, how you maybe evaluate quality, but one of the things that I was was interesting to me is I was actually on the other side of an acquisition a long time ago. I worked for a store called HBL. It was a Mercedes, Porsche, Audi, Land Rover, Aston dealer in Tysons Corner, Virginia. And it was owned by a single point family, the Launch family. It was great store. And about midway through my tenure, we were purchased by the Penske organization. And it was really interesting, because the day of, there were a lot of things swirling around. Do we have jobs? Do we not have jobs? We don't know. And honestly, I'm not being critical of the Penske organization. It might be the best. It's an incredible organization. They didn't really communicate with us. So the day the closing took place, we went in the general manager's office and we sat there. We're like, what are we supposed to do today? And my general manager had a really dry sense of humor, and he decided to call the corporate offices in New Jersey and put on speakerphone. And he said, well, I should back up a second. We all would have gone and found other jobs during that silence, except the owner was smart enough to tether us by doing something called the twofer, meaning anything we earned from the date of the announcement to the date of closing, he would double. So we were all going to be there day one.
Retention
that was
bonus.
The first thing.
Yeah. I like that.
It was a great retention bonus. Still wish I had that jet ski. Anyway, and he sat there and called New Jersey. I said, well, what are we supposed to do? And they laughed. The counterpart on the other end laughed and said, well, it's not like we got a bus of people up here in New Jersey. They're going to drive down and replace you all. we bought you because you were successful. And we kind of want to keep you successful. And, we'll add as we see, and we'll talk to you, but really just go about your days, which is great maybe in hindsight, but what did they risk by not really communicating who they are, what they expected of us, whether they wanted us or not? And so when you go into the acquisition side, the ability to plug in early is really critical. Luckily, the last couple acquisitions have been with private groups. And so when the cat gets out of the bag, and I think this is great, they really care about the people that we've purchased dealers. I think where we position ourselves well is that I take this personally. I want to build that relationship with their team. And maybe that's an overly ambitious goal, but I feel like I do have those relationships where they can confide in me, share their fears, be honest with me, tell me things that they don't like, things that they do like, tell me how it's getting better. But my point of that is, then connect. Then you can connect, and then you start to understand. Start with the general manager. It's usually a one-on-one conversation with me or Chris Ourisman or both of us or some part of our management team. And first thing is just sort of give them some confidence that it's going to be okay. And usually what's interesting is, I think this is the part that's really, I actually get really happy when it happens this way, is the general manager, the first thing they do is they're not talking about pay or demo or benefits. They're like, I want to know how this is going to impact my people. I really care. And here's the special, they want to tell you the people that they think are special that you might not think are special. Like they think you're not going to go down to a granular level to see that this is an amazing individual. And so when once you find out, go, yeah, I can't wait to meet that person too. Then you start to build a partnership and some trust. And, most recent acquisition, and then this goes back a little bit into acquisition strategy about being a little different as an organization. Our most recent acquisition was a Honda store. And the general manager, the only thing they were concerned with in really protecting was they had established a system where they did not have an F&I department, that it was one person, one process, one price. And they were proud of it. And they showed me the measurable success. And when I was talking to the general manager, and he'll probably laugh now, I think he was like, I'm not going to let you guys buy the store if you tell us we can't operate this way. He was probably saying, I won't work here if you don't let us. But we're like, no, we want to learn too. And, maybe we want to improve the system. And in a couple of years, if the system's not right, okay, we can change it. But let's be curious together about it. And I think that's what dealerships want to understand, is that they want to know that you understand them too.
Yeah, well, I feel like we could talk for many more hours. So we'll have to save some for another episode. So appreciate you coming on and sharing. If
I get invited back, I would love to. I've really enjoyed it. And I thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Please give the podcast a rating, consider subscribing to the show, and check the show notes for links to what we talked about. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.